So some of the pros of perennials is they can often grow places where annuals can't, so steep slopes, hard shade, full shade, soggy, saturated soil, in standing water. These are all places where there's lots of options for perennial vegetables and almost no options for animals. They can grow with minimal inputs. They need much less nitrogen. They're better at sort of scavenging for nutrients, so they can be grown with very few soil amendments or in crappy soil where animals might struggle. Some of the cons of perennial vegetables is they often need multiple seasons to get established. So the first year you're planting it, for a lot of them, you might not get any harvest. You might get at least. So typically 2 to 4 years of sort of startup time, depending on how good conditions are. Some perennial vegetables can be too easy to grow. There's a few that can kind of take over if given the space and conditions are right. And for the most part, they can be controlled by harvesting, but if it's not something that you like enough to harvest it regularly, you might end up with too many nettles, So that's something to consider when choosing what to plant, where to plant it, how to arrange those beds. On a larger than home scale, perennial vegetables can also have management issues of they require a lot of land weeding. So with a market garden or a commercial farm, you can till the crop under and really get your weeds under control fast. Whereas if you've got big beds or fields of perennials that get all full of quackgrass or some other really annoying weed, that could be a real management hassle. So I think they slot in really, really well to like home and homestead scale, and they're a little bit harder to implement on market garden farm scale. This guy, Aaron Duman, out of Vermont, a few years ago did a SARE grant on and created a grower's manual for several perennial vegetables for specifically for market gardeners. So if you're working at that scale, I would recommend checking that out for more information. Any questions on perennial vegetables in general before I get into some of the species that I'm excited about? Yeah. So the question was, can some animals turn into perennials? There are some plants that we grow as annuals that really are perennial. The first one that comes to mind is garlic. We grow that as an annual, but it's actually a perennial. Like if you just let garlic be, it'll turn into a big plum, and that is actually a really nice way to grow garlic for if you're growing for the leaves, if you're growing it for top sets as propagation material, or if you're growing it purely as a companion plant. There are other examples, and there's also lots of crops that we know as biennials or annuals that are descended from perennial ancestors and can potentially be bred back or potentially have perennial examples of that. So, for example, kale, which we know as a biennial typically, or kale's relative broccoli, which we know as an annual. These are all descended from a perennial wild kale, and there are perennial selections of kale. The problem is they don't tend to be hardy. So if you're in a place other Maine, or if you're going to a warmer climate, and are interested in perennial kale, I would check out Homesteader's Kaleidoscopic Threads from Experimental Farm Network, which is a really cool perennial kale. So the first thing I would recommend if you're interested in perennial vegetables is check out what's already growing. You might have lots of perennial vegetables already in the landscape. Dandelions are familiar. Most people are familiar with the greens of dandelion, but I think the flowers themselves are much tastier. My friend and perennial vegetable mentor, Stephen Barstow, likes what he calls dandy noodles, which are just the flower stems, and he lightly boils them and treats them like pasta, like when you put a red sauce on the dandelion stems. He also collects sort of excess dandelion roots in the fall and root cellars. And in like February, they're starting to sprout in his root cellar, or if they're not sprouting, you can bring them up and have these fresh vegetables in the middle of winter from the garden. So even if you're not talking about dandelion greens, there's other parts of the dandelion that can be quite nice. Hosta, ubiquitous, like in the worst kind of landscaping. And lots of people don't realize that it is edible. It's a perennial vegetable. This is a plant that you can find in the grocery store in several East Asian countries where these plants come from. Here in North America, we have thousands of accessions, cultivars of hosta, all selected for pretty leaves, and they're all edible and no one's eating them. Fully, like if you went and ate this hosta as it was in this photo, you would find it to be quite fibrous and probably not that good. What you want to harvest are what are called hostons, the little shoots before they unfurl, similar to an asparagus shoot. You wouldn't eat the big ferny, tough asparagus plants. You want those shoots, and you can basically treat it the same way, like sauteed with a little butter and garlic, or just steamed. They're quite delicious. So if you've got hosta around, I highly recommend next spring giving it a try. The whole plant, clover, is edible. Those are everywhere and are a nice nitrogen-fixing ground cover. I kind of like just the flowers in the salad. If you have a whole flower, it can be kind of like a tough bite, so I like to cut them up until they get spread out. Small children often like to pull out the individual florets and suck the nectar out of it. But nice plant all around. Common milkweed. This is really one of my favorite perennial vegetables. Not that long ago, this was a plant that everyone hated. It's this toxic, field weed that takes over. And now lots of people are coming around to the idea that this is a really important ecological plant. It's the host plant for monarch butterfly larvae. It hosts like over 100 species of insects, many of which only feed on milkweed. And that's all true and perfectly good reasons to plant common milkweed, but it's also a really good food for humans. That said, you do need to harvest the right part at the right time, and it does need to be cooked. In the 70s, there was some bad information that went around that you had to like boil it for 10 minutes in 2 changes of water, and that's definitely not necessary. Because basically, if it's really hot all the way through, that's all it takes. But you do need to be harvesting the young shoots before they unfurl, or flower buds, or flowers, or very young seed pods. If you ate like the big mature leaves that you see in this photo, you probably get a wicked stomachache. But the flowers, as you see in this photo, might be really delicious and dipped in that or fried as milkweed fritters. I find the reproductive structures of milkweed, buds, flowers, young fruit make a lovely tempura. So they have also just the buds, just steamed or boiled, are really delicious, kind of like a broccoli-like flavor and texture. And super easy to grow. Also, a lot of people will say, like, oh, that's kind of cool, but I'm really growing these for the monarchs. And like, that's my primary reason for wanting to grow this plant. And you can actually improve the habitat quality of milkweed by harvesting at the right time. The very best plant material for the monarchs to lay eggs on is fresh new growth. So if you harvest the flower buds by taking the top off the plant, that stimulates a lot of fresh new growth kind of late in the season, when otherwise most of the leaves will be big and tough, and that creates ideal egg-laying habitat for monarchs. So even once the plant's established, there's plenty of plant material and plenty of energy in the plant to support both human consumption and supporting monarch wildlife.
And it's only the common, not swamp or any other.
Correct. Excellent point. Only common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca, is human edible. All the other milkweed species, of which there are several, are not good for humans to eat. There are lots of species of violets around. They're all fully edible. They don't have a lot of flavor, in my opinion, but they do make a salad look fantastic, or a iced cake with violet over it, absolutely lovely. And they also have some phytonutrients that are sort of uncommon. So one of the things that we are finding is sort of overall supportive of human health is a healthy gut microbiome. And from what I have read, the number one thing that you can do to support your gut microbiome is eating lots and lots of different kinds of plants. Doesn't even take a high amount, but having a high diversity in what kind of plant material you're eating is quite helpful to that gut microbiome. So eating something like a handful of violets or violet leaves or flowers in the salad has a substantial health benefit overall. Flowers and leaves, all kinds of them. This is one that I would never recommend planting. This is Japanese knotweed, and I would rather this wasn't around. But since it is edible, it is perennial, and there's lots of things you can do with it. Mostly, I've heard people treating it like rhubarb, using the young shoots and cooking them pretty thoroughly, often utilizing the sort of sour to set off a sweet element. Question?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that my dad also teaches it to use for Lyme prevention treatment.
Yes, also a great source of resveratrol, which is a pretty potent antioxidant and medicinal chemical. So also useful for that.
So just the stems.
So the food portion is the young shoots before they get tough, basically, and medicinally it's usually the roots. And one of the nice elements of perennial vegetables is they can grow in a variety of contexts. This is my garden, sort of a somewhat chaotic forest garden, very I tend to do garden styles on the spectrum of naturalized, which this is very naturalized, to formal. The advantages of naturalized styles of gardening tend to be low inputs. You don't need to bring in a lot of material to have a garden looks like this. Tends to be low labor, high diversity, high productivity. And then on the other end of the spectrum, tends to be higher input, but it has like an aesthetic value that a lot of people are looking for. Also, its accessibility, like this garden can be at sometimes like impenetrable, like it's hard to get at everything because it's all cramped together. Which pros and cons on all levels. I'm just going to cycle through a couple of pictures real quick. So this is more of my garden. Here's an apple tree with several vegetables like walking onions, lovage, violets, all growing in and around the tree. It's my house with several perennial vegetables integrated into the border of annual gardens and annual production. And here's a more like formal landscape that does have some perennial edibles in it, but the proportion is much lower. This is one of my absolute favorite perennial vegetables. This is sochan, or Rudbeckia cineata. Has a long list of common names: cutleaf coneflower, green-headed coneflower, etc., etc. Sochan is the Cherokee name, and it seems to be starting to win out as the most common name. And I like it because it's concise and just means this plant. One of the reasons I like this one so much is it's native, it has great habitat benefits, it's productive, it's delicious, it's really got a lot going for it. It can be a little bit on the aggressive side. It tends to spread by rhizome and can take over in lots of settings. So if you've got sort of a flower garden setting where there's high species diversity, it can often really overtake a lot of other ornamental plants. So it might be more suited to like growing like up against the woodland or in a ditch or somewhere where it can grow to like a 12-foot diameter circle. But you can also control its spread simply by harvesting heavy. So if it gets going and it's outgrowing its space, you can either try to eat a lot more of it, or even just cut it down and turn that biomass into mulch, just to keep it from getting out of the space where you want it to grow. I haven't really had much of an issue with it spreading too much, but I'm like taking chunks out of it to propagate for sale. And I've seen it in like high competition environments do well, but barely spread at all. So if you took a chunk out of the field and stuck one of these in there, it would probably survive and it probably wouldn't take over because of all the competition. You put this in a vegetable garden or a flower garden, that might be a setting where it would tend to take over. Also, if you want to get really in-depth, I do a podcast called Propaganda by the Seed. Most episodes focus on a single species, and